you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
No.
I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you.
Born over 100 years prior to the outbreak of the Clone Wars, Darth Plagueis, publicly known as Higo Damask II, and remembered as Darth Plagueis the Wise, was a powerful male Moon Dark Lord of the Sith hailing from the planet of Midi-chlorian. Damask was born between 147 and 120 BBY to a female Moon and male Moon. His mother discovered his sensitivity to the Force, and she gave him away to the Bith Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Tenebrous, who trained Damask, now Plagueis, in the ways of the Sith. The apprentice eventually murdered Tenebrous in 67 BBY on the planet of Boldemic by crushing his neck with a very swift strike. Rising to become the Sith Lord, Plagueis, acting as leader of Damask Holdings, a financial corporation with great power and influence in the intergalactic banking clan, manipulated galactic affairs and corporations to advance the Sith agenda and the Galactic Republic's fall. While manipulating the young Naboo Sheev Palpatine on the planet of Naboo, he discovered Palpatine, a man with a desire to rule. Plagueis manipulated the boy to murder his family, which led the young man to accept Plagueis' Sith tutelage. The master and apprentice continued the Sith agenda together, however, with Palpatine saving his master from many assassination attempts. However, Palpatine, now taking the Zabrak Sith apprentice Darth Maul, wished to kill his master and rule the Republic alone. Celebrating that the manipulated senators and bureaucrats of the Republic had voted Palpatine as the new Supreme Chancellor, Plagueis was murdered in his sleep by his apprentice in 32 BBY, while still holding on to the dream that he would become immortal. Venerated as one of the most powerful Sith Lords to ever live, Darth Plagueis is one of my personal favourites to ever exist. This has nothing to do, of course, with the fact that the book written by James Luceno is my absolute favourite novel of all time, and a true masterpiece when it comes to storytelling. Today, I'm going to be reviewing every possible fact, detail, statement, and feat I have found concerning Darth Plagueis the Wise. This will be broken into 5 distinct categories. The first one being physical attributes, the second one being lightsaber and martial arts prowess, and the third one being distinctly force abilities. However, we will split the force abilities into distinct subcategories across various sections. However, we have to acknowledge one thing. This is purely my opinion when I say at the end of the video, where I personally believe Plagueis lands on the power hierarchy, and you're perfectly fine to have your own opinion as well. With that out of the way, however, let us proceed. Bow down, acolytes, as we are in the presence of true masters. Despite being a male Moon and speculatively 100 years old by the time of the Phantom Menace, Plagueis was still an immense physical powerhouse, whether you like it or not. Despite the Moons being considered one of the more fragile species, Plagueis, paired with force augmentation, still had an impressive amount of physical attributes and feats that he had under his banner. These including but are not limited to Plagueis easily scaling a building by clinging to a wall. The quote goes as follows from the Darth Plagueis novel. Plagueis stepped away from the wall to glance at the upper story windows, all of which were dark save for an arched opening near the end of the wall. Crouching, he maneuvered through bushes under a series of wide windows, then began to scale the wall, fastened to it like an insect. However, this is nowhere near his most impressive physical display. Plagueis was so physically strong with force augmentation, he was able to break the Bith Darth Tenebrous' neck with a strike augmented by the force following his death. Plagueis was then able to augment himself in such a way he was able to break into a transparasteel cockpit by assailing it with his fist. However, he did need to use force augmentation in order to accomplish this impressive feat. Transparasteel was explicitly speculated upon and chosen by various beings as the product of which various starships around the galaxy would be created due to its durable endurance, and Plagueis was able to punch through it effortlessly with force augmentation. Plagueis' physical abilities in terms of combat are quite few and far between. However, he was able to launch a Zabrak across a cabin with a well-placed kick, crushing his chest cavity and slamming him against a bulkhead with enough force to snap his spine instantly and pulp his arteries. An incredibly gruesome scene when you think about it. Similarly, with his bare hands in severely injured state, Plagueis was able to snap necks, smash skulls and windpipes, and plunges his fist through armored torsos. During the Maladian assassination attempt, Plagueis was also similarly able to disarm Darth Veneris through sheer force, nearly removing his fingers in the process, which was an incredibly impressive feat as Darth Venomous had been taught by Darth Tenebris, Plagueis' own master, and Venomous was fueled by the power of the dark side after hearing that his master had died at the hand of Plagueis. With regards to his speed and agility, Plagueis was quite impressive, but nothing that had ever been seen before. Plagueis was able to race across the landscape in a dazzling blur well before his prime, and was but able to outtrace rainfall. This can be comparable to Darth Bane. However, Darth Bane's speed was more combat oriented, as he was able to utilize his lightsaber in such a maneuver of Sarisu that he was able to destroy and redirect quadruplets of rainfall alongside Emperor Sheev Palpatine, who at this time was his apprentice. Plagueis Orbit takes flight in pursuit of a herd of quadrupeds, and was also able to appear to 11D as a gust of wind, forcing him to adjust his processing input to properly perceive him, as he was too fast for the droid to naturally calculate. Plagueis was also able to move at such speed to appear like flashes of lightning to an onlooker, as described during his duel with Darth Venomous. The contest took them backward and forward through the trees, across narrow streams, and onto piles of rocks that were ruins of an ancient sentry post. Plagueis took a moment to wonder if anyone at the fort was observing the results of the contest, which from afar must have looked like lightning flashing through the forest understory. Plagueis was also able to utilize his legs to leap over a 10-meter high wall with unequivocal ease, and was as an apprentice, slightly more agile than his master Tenebris, who at this point could be a speculatory 200 years old. Plagueis was then able to evade, deflect, and absorb a barrage of blaster fire from omnidirectional shooters, moving at speeds almost beyond 11-4D's processing capabilities, despite it extending to the calculating blaster bolt trajectory, with 11-4D being able to perceive the blaster bolts but not being able to perceive Plagueis' swift movements. However, absorbing a barrage of blaster fire is likely due to Tutor Menace, and not due to his own inherent durability. Through a combination of immense speed, acrobatics, and agility, Plagueis was similarly able to deflect and evade omnidirectional blast fire from the first ring of 200 heavily armed automata. And then, in alteration with the young Palpatine, he was able to repeat this process until the floor was piled high with smoking Husker's droids. Plagueis, during combat with Darth Venomous, was able to bypass his defenses with an attack velocity that turns his lightsaber into a blinding rod, scorching his opponent from chest to chin, an incredibly impressive feat, with Plagueis being noted by Tenebris as an extreme combat specialist despite his particularly disdain for lightsaber dueling. I did like to spar with his master every now and then, just to keep up with the skill. Finally, in a test of speed, agility, and accuracy, Plagueis, alongside a young Palpatine, who is widely considered to be the fastest combative Sith of all time, defeated an army of several hundred cursed warriors without killing them or suffering a scratch, and armed only with force plaques, not even with lightsaber blades. With regards to his durability, Plagueis was an immense powerhouse, but this was likely due to immense augmentation with the Force and the added bonus of moons naturally having 3 halves. Plagueis was able to withstand the polar weather conditions of Magneto in thin clothing, and seemingly without discomfort when the temperature was cold enough to freeze Palpatine's blood, with Magneto being one of the most freezing planets alongside Hoth in the natural galactic standards. And before he was even 8 years old, Plagueis was, without an envirosuit, capable of enduring the same planets with violent storms, an incredibly impressive durability feat. Plagueis was also able to train himself to forego sleep and indeed did not sleep for over 2 decades. Ironically, which would end in his downfall, as Palpatine would exploit this by getting his master drunk and exploiting his desire for sleep. Plagueis was also seemingly unaffected by a swarm of voracious insects feeding off of his blood, which is absolutely insane when you think about it. He was also able to harden his skin to be virtually impervious to physical attacks, the likes we have not seen since Marco Ragnos. Paired with his gauntlets, Marco Ragnos was able to merge himself inwoundable in battle, with this being the closest approximation we can rate that to. This is an incredibly advanced Sith technique and lightly tied to force augmentation or a ritual. Despite making no attempt to defend himself, Plagueis again is able to endure Sidious blasting him with force lightning, while drawing on the dark side more deeply than he ever had. This is an incredibly insane durability feat. With Plagueis not even defending himself, Sidious was able to blast him with lightning, with Sidious's lightning even at the time of the Phantom Menace being exceptionally powerful, and at the time of his final progression of power in Dark Empire, his lightning was able to turn people to ash, and at this stage, it was able to char people into husks. Plagueis was also able to numb the pain of having his lower back pulped by a rock. And while attacked by the Melodian assassins, I'm only going to bring that up about 37 more times in this video, a decapitated disc removing a portion of his face and severing his trachea alongside several blood vessels. Yet, despite being also having lost copious amounts of blood and multiple of his hearts threatening to fail, he summoned the immense power to attack his assassins physically and with the Force. With it being examined afterwards, it was speculated that they had used explosives. That was the immense extent of Plagueis' physical strikes when augmented by the Force to its fullest degree. After Plagueis' heart failed, he remained conscious despite paralyzing agony before shattering the eardrums of his attackers, smashing skulls and windpipes, and blowing apart their bodies with his sheer power. And despite incurring additional damage, Plagueis remained capable of using the Force against the Melodian assassins, and before the arrival of his apprentices, was on the brink of unleashing a final hell on his opponents, which would have virtually incinerated them. Then, in spite of his grievous injuries, grievous, Plagueis, alongside his apprentice, delivered a swift death to the remaining Melodians, almost easily and instantaneously. Sidious was also there, though, and was aiding him in the death of the assassins. However, Plagueis did most of the work as he desired to fuel himself on the dark side, gorging on the rage that killing Melodian assassins would do. His final intangible durability feat would be when Palpatine remarked that damage that his master had sustained had done nothing to diminish his strength in the Force, which is immense. The comparable of this could be likely to Darth Malgus, with Darth Vader, who had perhaps some of the most physical limitations in all of Star Wars put on him, being severely handicapped in his usage of the Force and far weaker than he was as Anakin Skywalker. The quote about Darth Plagueis goes as follows. Sidious pivoted to see his master limp into the room, mouth, chin, and neck concealed behind a breath mask or transpirator of some sort. Most of the vibro-blade wounds had healed, but his skin looked especially wan. Sidious had been wondering if Plagueis had been weakened by the attack, but he saw now that for all the punishment his body had sustained at the hands of the Melodian assassin, the moon was no less strong in the Force. Now we move on to his lightsaber and martial arts proficiency. By Plagueis' time, the Sith had, however, outgrown the usage of lightsabers, using them only to mock and humiliate the Jedi, an ideology that would be passed on to Sidious. Despite having little interest in dueling, Tenet pronounced Plagueis a master of the art and a master swordmaster. Plagueis was a heritage to 1,000 years of study into every aspect of Jedi lore, which included their lightsaber sequences, forms, and techniques. Meaning he had a rudimentary understanding of every single lightsaber form that was currently in existence, besides the Forbidden Eight form, which I'll make a video on eventually. According to James Luceno, had a battle come between Plagueis and Sidious in a combat situation, Plagueis would have more likely have emerged victorious, suggesting parity to his apprentice as a combatant, who was a master of all 7 styles of lightsaber combat, and someone whom Darth Maul at this time considered to be more powerful than anyone he had ever met in both the Force and in combat. With it being revealed on Facebook, the following quote occurs. Do you feel that it had come to a contest of lightsabers or force powers, Sidious would have prevailed anyway? With James Luceno responding, if it had come to a duel, I think Plagueis may have found a way to undermine his apprentice. Undermine typically means killing via secrecy, meaning that Plagueis likely would have been able to coerce his apprentice into losing his confidence or in other various ways. Alongside a young Palpatine, Plagueis was able to defeat an army of the primitive cursed people's most capable warriors and barbarians, wielding only one singular force plague, without suffering a single scratch or even wounding his armor and clothes. Despite being trained by Tenebrous to be an expert in his style, Plagueis defeats the Bith Venomous in lightsaber combat. This is incredibly immense, as Venomous was directly compared to the likes of Plagueis and directly designed in terms of his combative ability to kill Plagueis, as Tenebrous believed that Plagueis would never get enough ambition to betray him, not knowing the moon's sinister plans and machinations all along. The quote goes as follows, Venomous charge. To Plagueis, lightsaber duels were tedious affairs, full of wasted emotion and needless acrobatics. Tenebrous, however, who had pronounced Plagueis a master of the art, had always enjoyed a good fight and had clearly bequeathed the enthusiasm to his other trainee. For no sooner had the blades of their weapons clashed than Venomous began to bring the fight to him in the most unexpected ways, twirling his surprisingly limber body, tossing the lightsaber from hand to hand, mixing forms. At one point, he leapt to an overhanging grill branch, and, when Plagueis severed it with a forced blow, hung suspended in the air no mean feat, in itself and continued the fight, as if from higher ground. Worst of Plagueis, Teneris had made Venomous an expert in Plagueis' style, and so the Bith could only anticipate, but counter every one of Plagueis' moves. In short, Venomous penetrated the defenses, searing the side of Plagueis' neck. The contest took them backward and forward through the trees, across narrow streams, and up onto a pile of rocks that were the ruins of an ancient sentry post. Plagueis took a moment to wonder if anyone at the fort was observing the results of the contest, which, from afar, must have looked like lightning flashing through the forest's understory. Realizing that the fight would go on indefinitely, he took himself out of his body and began working his material self like a marionette, no longer on the offensive, instigating attacks, but merely responding to Venomous's lunges and strikes. Gradually, the Bith understood that something had changed, that what up until then had been a fight to the death seemed suddenly like a training exercise. Exasperated, he doubled his efforts, fighting harder, more desperately, putting more power into each maneuver and blow, and in the end, surrendering his precision and accuracy. At the height of Venomous's attack, Plagueis came back to himself with such a fury that his lightsaber became a blinding rod. A two-handed upward swing that launched from between his legs caught Venomous off guard. The blade didn't go deep enough to puncture the Bith's lung, but scorched him from chest to chin. As his large cleft hand snapped backwards in retreat, Plagueis brought his lightsaber straight down, tearing Venomous's weapon from his gloved hand and nearly taking off his long fingers as well. With a gesture from his other hand, Venomous called for his lightsaber, but Plagueis was a split second quicker, and the hilt shot into his own right hand. Sending a storm of force lightning building in the Bith, he crossed the two crimson blades in front of him and said, "Yield." As claimed and stated multiple times during various novels, Darth Plagueis was one of the most powerful Sith Lords and brilliant to have ever lived. As the penultimate member to the Order of the Sith Lords established by Darth Bane, Plagueis inherited the ever-encompassing power of well over 2,000 generations of Baneite Sith, including their knowledge. Plagueis similarly was adept in some of the most arcane and unorthodox as well as unnatural applications of the Force, likely where Sidious derived the famous phrase, "the dark side of the Force is the pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural" from. Darth Plagueis attained unprecedented mastery over life and death, a realm of ability described as unlimited power. This would exceed the likes of Darth Endedu and Darth Vitiate, who, in my personal opinion, are the two Sith who are closest to the likes of immortality, with Vitiate draining entire planets in order to revitalize his spirit to stay alive for over 1,000 years, and Darth Endedu coming up with essence transfer, allowing a Sith to jump into another person's body and dominate their will if it was sufficiently strong enough. Darth Sidious also attests Plagueis' ability to manipulate Midi-chlorians to his great power and mastery of the Force. Though Midi-chlorian manipulation Plagueis was able to tap into the deepest strata of the Force in ways that his ancient Sith predecessors had not, tapping into the mysteries of the Force at a greater length than any other Sith in history up to that time, with the exception of perhaps Vitiate, who had over 1,000 years in order to garner his dark side influence and power. Palpatine was able to perceive Plagueis through the Force as a terrifying nexus of energy able to contain the full power of the dark side. Statements that correlate directly with the likes of Vitiate during his time as the Sith Emperor, and similarly statements made by Darth Tyrannus about Sidious himself during the time of Attack of the Clone. Plagueis eventually came to understand that there were no powers that he could not achieve through sheer effort of will, and that if a Sith of equal power had preceded him, their secrets had been lost to history, with the likes of Vitiate being among these. According to James Luceno, Plagueis was immensely more powerful than Sidious in the Force at the time of the Phantom Menace, and in the duel. Plagueis had also been technically engineered by Darth Tenebrous to be strong in the Force. The quote goes as follows. A decade later, Higo would learn that while Carr had in fact done his best to keep his Force abilities to himself, he had come to the attention of Ruger Snow when the two had a chance meet on Highport Space Center. Years would pass before Noman found Higo's mother, whom he had conscripted not as an apprentice. She wasn't strong enough in the Force, but as a disciple, whose task it had become to romance Carr and bear the fruit of that seduction. A child who Noman Biff science predicted would be born strong in the Force. After infiltrating the body of his apprentice utilizing his Midi-chlorian experimentation, Teneris was able to find Plagueis' connection to the Force to be considerably greater than he had ever anticipated, believing that after killing Tenebrous, that Plagueis had received a massive amplification in his dark side influence and immense power. Consequence of his master's death, Plagueis finds his powers amplified, very similar to how Sidious felt his powers amplified to the point that he felt he could rip open stars if he desired. A feat that is on par with the likes of Naga Sadao, who was able to utilize the Sith Corsair, as I went over briefly in my complete history of the Sith Purebloods video, to rend stars from the sky and rend fire from the stars. Despite being over a decade into his training, Plagueis remained powerful beyond Palpatine's comprehension, and despite his powers increasing tenfold since, Palpatine remained uncertain whether he was powerful and masterful enough in the Force as Plagueis was. Some 2 decades before Plagueis' prime, Sidious believed that alongside himself, his master was more than equal to the Jedi's most powerful members, this encompassing Grand Master Yoda and Mace Windu, who at this point were likely the only two that Sidious even deemed to be worthy of their attention, if any at all. Through immense experimentation into the Force, Plagueis was able to find his own midi-chlorian count increase as he continued to manipulate it, actually increasing his midi-chlorian count by the day. And through his sheer presence in the Force, Plagueis was able to unbalance the planetary nexus of Force energies on Naboo, triggering mountain-shaking earthquakes and freak weather events that was able to unearth various relics and can cause landslides that would fall into Gungan cities. Plagueis was also in to severely intimidate a young Palpatine by revealing only a fraction of his power, with the following quote from Darth Plagueis going as follows. "Careful, boy," he said after a moment. "You are not the only being in this pulse-ray room with the power to kill." Palpatine's eyes opened wide as he took a step back. "I can sense it," Plagueis grew deliberately haughty. "What you sense is a fraction of what I can bring to bear." Plagueis, able to unleash his dark powers against a group of Maladian assassins, creating an overwhelming disturbance in the Force that was speculated to be felt by every Jedi in all of the galaxy and Coruscant, felt by both Palpatine and the Jedi, and leaving an aroma of dark side energy in its wake, so much so that the Jedi thought the dark side nexus was located on the planet. The experiment Plagueis performed in his volcano lair on Abora transformed it into a dark side nexus, beyond anything Sidious had experienced. Although the only real dark side nexus Sidious has experienced at this point was the dark side nexus on Korriban. And however, at this time, the nexus on Korriban had severely faded since the time of King Adas when it had been in its prime, due to the Sith Cataclysm and the Sith Purge, where the Jedi during the Great Hyperspace War, just after defeating Naga Sadao and Ludo Kresh, bombarded Coruscant, crushing and destroying many of the ancient tombs of the Dark Lords, and their secrets along with it, burying it beneath the desert planet. Sidious believed that the dark side nexus on Abora was akin to what he would expect to find on a Sith world as powerful as Korriban or Dromund Kaas, with two of the most prominent worlds in the history of the Sith. After killing Plagueis, it triggered an immense disturbance in the Force, with the dark side energies unleashed conferring themselves to Sidious and greatly enhancing his power, similar to the augmentation in the Force that Plagueis felt after he killed his own master Tenebrous during a mining incident on Abaldemic, a world in the Outer Rim. The planet goes as follows. A tremor took hold of the planet. Sprung from death, it unleashed itself as a powerful wave, at once burrowing deep into the world's core and radiated through its saccharine atmosphere to shake the stars themselves. At the quake's epicenter stood Sidious, one elegant hand vised on the burnished sill of an expansive translucency, a vessel filled suddenly to the bursting, the force so strong with him that he feared he might disappear into it, never to return. With regards to his knowledge of the Force from his Sith predecessors, Plagueis inherited over 1,000 years of teachings, including study into both every aspect of the Force and Jedi lore itself, with the Sith recruiting Jedi lore in order to become familiar with their enemies. On Abora, Plagueis possessed one of the finest libraries in the galaxy outside of the archives of Oba Sky and the Jedi Temple, with the Jedi Temple believed to have the largest archive in history. Plagueis' was a close second, with Plagueis possessing knowledge on virtually every single species, relic, and ritual ever conducted in the galaxy besides those that have been locked to history. Plagueis was considered one of the most intelligent and intellectual Sith to have ever existed. Plagueis was also a master of the arcane and unnatural knowledge and practices of the Force. And despite Palpatine's power increasing rapidly, he was not sure that he had learned all his master's secrets, including immortality via midi-chlorian manipulation. Plagueis' mastery over midi-chlorian manipulation furthermore reflected his vast knowledge of the dark side of the Force. And through experimenting on Darth Venomous after defeating him in formal combat, Plagueis unlocked some of the deepest secrets of the Force that had been previously unknown to every one of his Sith predecessors. Foregoing sleep for 20 years, Plagueis dedicated his life for 2 decades of unbroken study into both midi-chlorian manipulation and the few remaining secrets of the Force that had eluded him all this time in his century-long lifespan. Plagueis had also claimed to unlock the secrets of life and death itself, believing that they were tied directly to Sith dominance for centuries. Plagueis furthermore studied the fundamental principles of the Force, including Sith magic and mysticism, in ways that previous Sith lords had not, although he did not have a particular affinity for this ability. Through doing so, however, he revolutionized Sith understanding of the relationship between biology and the Force. The quote goes as follows: "What is the Force? The Jedi say it is created by life, but I say the Force creates life. It is a simple deduction, an obvious conclusion, when supported by structural experimentation. Yet consider this: the galaxy's leading scientific minds are largely ignorant of the Force, and the galaxy's most skilled Force users reject science. The latter are caught up in romantic mysticism, convinced they have been called by a higher power. The former has no excuse. Thus, I will be the first to pursue this line of inquiry, a scientific understanding of the Force that is not the same as the memorization of incantations. Science seeks to understand the principle behind the reaction, not merely how to replace it, particularly when formulas are bloated with centuries of empty ornamentation. To study alchemy, one must strip away its rhyming phrases and preserve obsession with blood sacrifice. To study shamanic talismans, one must look beyond the words of invocation. When a talisman unleashes its own power, what is the true trigger? The words, the speaker's tone, his mental state. If a talisman's power resides inside the gem, what happens if a fragment is shaved off? Then another. Does the energy dissipate when sufficient mass is lost? Is the ratio consistent for similar gems and similar talismans? The Sith of old never asked these questions, but tradition and obedience extinguished their spark of curiosity. And these questions are much more than idle speculation. My science will remove everything superfluous. In this way, the true nature of the fundamental elements of the Sith and Jedi wield so casually will be revealed. So it must be that I am the first. I will change it all. The Sith wallowed in ritual even during their centuries under the rule of two, playing dress up in frightening costumes and posturing for our followers. I will burn away the colourful wrappings and study the skeletal structure that reveals the architecture of reality. The following passage that I just read comes from the Science of Creating Life, a section of the Book of the Sith, Secrets of the Dark Side, one of my favourite dark side related novels and lore novels in the expanded universe, with it adding many details to the lore, including King Adas, and especially some interesting notes about Darth Plagueis from Sidious, and interesting notes from Sidious himself and Plagueis himself. Further adding to his impressive array of Force abilities as well as natural Force affinity, Plagueis, alongside his master Darth Tenebrous, a Bith, held up several enormous slabs of rock weighing possibly dozens of tons. Plagueis, however, would prove his superiority even prior to his amplification in dark-side power over his master, by utilizing telekinesis to bring the slabs down upon Tenebrous. However, Tenebrous was distracted by holding off an enormous swirling ball of fire that was going through the cave and would have incinerated the both of them. However, nonetheless, he pulled these massive plummeting slabs down with such speed and momentum that Tenebrous barely registered what was going to hit him. The resultant impact leaving Tenebrous's head cracked open like an egg and the chest cavity pierced by a stalactite. Plagueis was also to levitate massive slabs of rubble to form a pile high enough for him to reach the oculus of the roof of the grotto that he had buried him and Tenebrous within, one that, despite his limited abilities at this time, nothing short of a jetpack could get him up to, an incredibly impressive feat, and this would have required unequivocal and unaided focus in order to completely and utterly utilize this ability to its fullest extent. Plagueis was also able to manipulate nanosyringes with microscopic fork nudges, and snap a Plutonian's neck with a click of his finger, utilizing telekinesis in one of its more brutal applications and effects, very similar to Wanda Maximoff breaking various people's necks in Multiverse of Madness in the MCU. Without gesture, Plagueis hurled a young Palpatine to the floor before pulling him back to his feet, an incredibly impressive feat, as Palpatine had one of the most naturally powerful Force ninjas in the entire galaxy, as well as one of the most powerful Force barriers, even at this time far before his prime, and Plagueis, without even using gestures, which is commonly needed for Force users, was able to telekinetically ragdoll him like he was a child. He was also able to catch young Palpatine off guard with a surprise Force choke, not only suppressing Palpatine's impressive Force sensibility, but also proving his superiority by shattering his Force barrier with ease once again. In a severely injured state, Plagueis was able to unleash potent telekinetic powers against a group of Melodian assassins attempting to kill him, first turning every loose object around him into a deadly projectile with a clap of his hands that flew at the oncoming Melodian. Then, with a force wave that he unleashed, he all but atomized a few dozen armored Melodians, the result of which was mistook as caused by an explosion, which was speculated by Republic scientists and examiners. Then, without gesturing, he caused the very floor to shake, knocking down several assassins by the sheer force of the earthquake he had incurred. Now, with perhaps his most impressive telekinetic display, at least in his state, while suffocating and intoxicated, Plagueis conjured a telekinetic storm that rendered himself anthropomorphic, washing over his apartment to hurl objects around the suite as he was being attacked by Palpatine's barrage of Sith lightning. With regards to Sith lightning, Plagueis was able to generate lightning alongside his master powerful enough to burrow through solid rock itself, and with a tangle of light, Plagueis launched a Clotonian into a ceiling of a cavern, leaving him as if his bones had turned to dust and his body paralyzed from the weight stand, which is incredibly impressive due to the fact this was a massively pre-primed Plagueis before he truly unlocked the deeper mysteries of the dark side and its mysticism. Plagueis was also able to effortlessly kill an Iktochi priestess by tricking lightning into her body, bringing her blood to boil and almost setting her hands on fire. Similarly, he was able to generate a storm of force lightning that spreads across a landscape. The following quote goes like this: during the final chapter of Darth Plagueis, getting to his fleet, Plagueis extended his long arms in front of him and loosed a storm of force lightning that crackled over the landscape, igniting fires in the grass. Now, we move on to his other abilities, such as Force Fellow. During the attack by the Meladians, despite his trachea being severed and the lower half of his jawbone removed, Plagueis summons a sonic shockwave that shatters the eardrums of his attackers within a 10-meter radius, all but leaving them cringing on the floor and crying due to the sheer force of his power. With regards to his telepathic and mind abilities and manipulation, Plagueis was able to read Venomous's surface thoughts, noting how they flew in a myriad of directions, using it to probe his mind with the fact that Tenebrous was dead. Plagueis was also able to read a young Palpatine's surface thoughts, noting how he was speculating over the effects of his master's injuries, and was also able to read the mind of Jabba the Hutt to discern he was telling the truth, despite the Hutt species' natural force immunity, making this notoriously difficult to do, especially with regards to mental ability, as we can see Luke Skywalker attempting to mind trick Jabba the Hutt and being unable to do so due to the Hutt's natural resistance to the dark side of the Force and the Force in general, as well as mental manipulation. Prior to the age of 5, Plagueis could manipulate the emotions of his playmates. Now, this is one of the most darkest things in all of Star Wars, as in one instance, he mind tricked another Moon to jump out of a window just because he pushed past him, having undermined the force bubble that made the Yinchori immune to mind tricks. Plagueis was similarly able to compel a murderous Yinchori subject in becoming peaceful, an incredibly impressive mental manipulative feat, and was able to compel a handmaiden into revealing confidential information to him almost effortlessly. Plagueis was also able to create a lifelike projection of himself that was able to deceive a young Darth Sidious into thinking that it was a real thing. Incredibly impressive, as Sidious was a master of force illusions and a master of these apparitions, very similar to Plagueis. However, it could be argued that Plagueis' skill even exceeded his apprentice, even in Dark Empire, as it certainly exceeded him at this point. Plagueis was also able to alter the environment to his liking, affecting a snowstorm swirling around him so as not to be touched by a single flake of ice, or melting before they could reach him, literally increasing his body temperature to the point he was able to effortlessly melt snow just by sheer body heat. Plagueis was also able to amplify his auditory senses to pick up a conversation out of earshot, utilizing the complex ability of force listening. Plagueis' force perception was also incredibly powerful, with Tenebrous finding Plagueis' sensory abilities more impressive than he had ever anticipated in the Tenebrous way. Plagueis was also capable of perceiving the microscopic activities of Midi-chlorians, microscopic life forms dwelling in every single living being. Plagueis was also able to sense the state of his own Midi-chlorian, perceiving that they had not increased in despite an amplification in power after the death of Tenebrous. Plague was able to use this ability to observe every detail of Tenebrous's death in gory detail. Looking at the bit through the Force, he perceived that the midi-chlorians were already beginning to die out, as the neurons that made up Tenebrous' lofty brain and muscle cells that powered his once able heart. Plagueis was also able to sense how Shidou's shapeshifter in the form of Kubals was manipulating electromagnets through a gambling machine. An incredibly impressive feat, as this basically means Plagueis had a symbiotic and somewhat relationship with machinery, being able to sense it and sense what beings were interacting with it and how they were affecting it. Plagueis was also able to identify the design and price capabilities of every weapon wielded by a ring of super battle droids as they fired him omnidirectionally, calculating the best way to deflect or evade them accordingly, even though they moved at the speed of light. As only a child, Plagueis was able to sense the dark side in Rugus Gnome, aka Darth Tenebrous, with Rugus Gnome being his public persona as a professional shipbuilder, despite it being customary for Sith of the Bainite lineage to be a master of Force concealment and shrouding themselves in the dark side to keep beings from discovering their true dark side nature, hiding their presence in the Force. Similarly, as a child, Plagueis sensed the Force presence of a Jedi as a power cross purposes to his, and was able to stretch out, scan the forest with the Force, perceiving the movement of an intruder before confirming their identity as the Force user, with this being Darth Venomous himself, the failed apprentice of Darth Tenebrous. And with Palpatine's barriers no longer concealing him in the Force, Plagueis was able to extend the full extent of his power and breadth of his emotion. As the following quote notes, he could sense Palpatine now in all his dark glory. Anger and murder had pulled him down the wars he had raised, perhaps since infancy, to safeguard his secret. But there was no concealing it now. The Force was powerful in him. Bottled up for 17 standard years, his innate power had finally burst forth and could never again be stopped. All the years of repression, guiltless crimes, raw emotion bubbling forth, toxic to any who dared to touch or taste it. But beneath his anger lurked a subtle enemy, apprehension. Newly reborn, he was at great risk, but only because he didn't realize how powerful he was, or how extraordinarily powerful he could become. He would need help to complete his self-destruction. He would need help rebuilding those walls to keep him from being discovered. He was similarly able to use Force precognition and farsight to an immense degree, something that Tenebrous also desired to attack into as soon as he inhabited Plagueis' body. Tenebrous was able to find Plagueis' powers of foresight to be vastly more developed than he had anticipated, after his amplification and multiplication in power after the death of Tenebrous. Though Plagueis felt powers of foresight, Tenebrous foresaw Plagueis' death at the hands of Darth Sidious before Plagueis even did. And in the wake of his master's death, Plagueis sensed from across the galaxy a being of near equal power to his own, at least in terms of potential. Plagueis was similarly able to foresee the conflict that would consume Baldemic during the Clone War, as well as specific causes for the fighting, those being the Separatists and the Clone Army. Plagueis was also able to sense the fallout of Palpatine murdering his own family from across the galaxy, seeing visions of past, present, and future in gruesome images in the process, as he perceived the lack of Palpatine murdering his family with unequivocal ease, finally letting his immense power come to bear. Plagueis similarly senses he could not mention Camino in the presence of Jocasta Nu, ensuring she would remain critically ignorant of his existence a decade later, when Obi-Wan Kenobi would arrive in the Jedi Archive searching for the world, and she would be an incredibly rude little bitch to him. Plagueis was also able to sense imminent danger just before being attacked by Melodian assassins, seconds before they threw a decapitated disc that decapitated San Hill. Plagueis accurately predicted that Sifo-Dyas would place an order for the Clone Army, using his precognitive abilities, and in observing the death of King Verona, Plagueis indistinctly foresees his own demise. As the life left Verona's body, the path he and Plagueis followed ran deeper into darkness and absence. Then Plagueis stopped, overcome by a sudden sense that he had already seen and travelled his path. And he wondered as Verona breathed his last, or had the Force afforded him a glimpse of his future. While observing the young Anakin Skywalker through the Force, Plagueis foresaw the future and the impact that Anakin would have on galactic history. The quote goes as follows: Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the boy had arrived on the platform in a Jedi ship, Amidala, her handmaidens and guards, and a loose-lived Gungan in an open-topped hemispherical ataxi. Just then, the latter group was ascending the starship's boarding ramp, but Qui-Gon and the round-faced desert urchin had stopped short of the ship to speak about something. What? Plagueis asked himself, What topic had summoned such an earnest look to Qui-Gon's face, and such confused urgency in the boy? Lifting his face from macrobinoculars, he stretched out with the Force and fell victim to an assault of perplexing images, ferocious battles in deep space, the clashing of lightsabers, apparitions of radiant black, a black-helmeted cyborg rising from a table. By the time the gaze had returned to the platform, Qui-Gon and the boy had disappeared, trying desperately to make sense of the images granted to him by the Force. He stood motionless, watching the starship lift from the platform and climb into the night. He fought to repress the truth. The boy would change the course of history, both for the Sith and the Jedi. While listening in on a conversation between Maul and Sidious, Plagueis foresaw Maul's imminent downfall on Naboo at the hands of Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi after his victory over Qui-Gon Jinn. Along with his other myriad of abilities, he was a master of force absorption, force deflection, and barrier, being able to deflect blaster bolts, absorbing blaster bolts, and warding off a fury of vibrating attacks with a force shield. By the Melodian assassin, he was also able to utilize force healing, using the force to task his body into limiting the damage of having his back poked by a projectile, with his force momentarily stabilizing a mortally wounded Zabrak warrior Markap, and remarking that mending damaged body parts was no more difficult than levistating slabs of stone, and we already know from the telekinesis section how easy that was. Like many Bayonet Sith, Plagueis was a master at force concealment, capable of minimizing and almost exterminating his presence in the Force, and so disappearing into the material world without worrying about the Jedi discovering him and his Force signature. Plagueis' ability to conceal himself was so complete that even his apprentice failed to sense his presence in the Force. But the quote goes as follows. Over Dooku's shoulder, Palpatine saw in surprise that Higo Damask, Last Chill, and two other black-robed Moons were threading their way towards them. That he hadn't even sensed his master spoke to Plagueis' power completely to conceal himself, even from a fellow Sith. Plagueis, while in the presence of some of the most powerful Jedi at the time, being Jedi's Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Sifo Dyas, was able to conceal his presence with ease, drawing the cloak of profane over himself and masking his darkness. Plagueis was similarly able to eavesdrop on a certain conversation between Sidious and Maul without being detected by either of them. Incredibly impressive, as Sidious had previously been trying to search for Plagueis through the Force in case he ever got snuck up again during a sneak attack. Plagueis was also able to stand in the same room as Masters Yoda and Windu, the most powerful Jedi of perhaps all time besides a few, and the most powerful Jedi of their respective eras, without being sensed, which is one of the most insane feats in terms of force concealment, alongside Palpatine sitting with the entire Jedi High Council without being detected through the Force. Now, we get to the elephant in the room, Darth Plagueis' manipulation of the Midi-chlorian. And trust me, I have a lot to say about this particular topic. Starting off, we first have to acknowledge that this is without a doubt Darth Plagueis' most powerful and unique ability, as no other Sith Lord in the history of the Star Wars lore has ever delved into this or even perfected it to the level that Plagueis had. Plagueis was the only one in literally all of Sith history who had any sort of rudimentary intrigue or interest in midichlorians and their manipulation, and was the first Sith basically to discover that this was the rudimentary form of cheating death if he could perfect it, with him dying to the hands of Sidious right on the cusp of unlocking the secret. Through his manipulation and alteration of the midichlorians, and thus the very fundamentals of life in the Star Wars galaxy as you know it, Plagueis gained a myriad of abilities that were lost to every other force sensitive of his era and perhaps of all eras. Through manipulation of its midichlorians, Plagueis was able to undermine the force immunity of Yin Chori, making it susceptible to mental suggestion and manipulation, very similar to what he did to the Hutts, with the Hutts and the Yin Chori being naturally immune to various techniques such as mind tricks, with Luke Skywalker being unable to mind trick the Crime Lord Jabba Desilic Teal in Return of the Jedi, with his attempts failing due to Jabba's immense mental willpower. Plagueis was also able to influence midichlorians into healing the body, being able to persuade, prompt, cajole, and coax them into action, and command them to heal him even as his physical capabilities are trophied. He was able to keep the physicality of a much younger Moon, despite being well over a century old. Through influence of his midichlorians, he was able to manipulate the very essence of life, an ability described as unlimited power, and was also capable of inducing midichlorians into creating life itself from nothingness, as stated in StarWarsDatabank.com. Plagueis was also regarded as a mystic obsessed with eternal life, and was believed to have possessed knowledge that could sustain those who were dying, and perhaps it even gained the ability to use midi-chlorians to draw new life directly from the wellspring of the Force, something would be confirmed in the Darth Plagueis novel. He was also able to demonstrate this ability by conceiving life in various creatures, as 114D, Plagueis and Palpatine's personal droid, displayed to Palpatine while he was in his younger years prior to the Phantom Menace that Plagueis was able to create pregnancies through the Force and not by natural means. Having, alongside Sidious, induced an imbalance in the Force a decade prior to the outbreak of the Naboo Crisis and the events of the Phantom Menace, Plagueis was able to resurrect Darth Venomous, killing him and resurrecting him to his life in this manner repetitively, being able to use his heinous experimentations on him and manipulate the Force to such a degree. He basically used Tenebris, his failed apprentice, as a doll, utilizing the Force in esoteric and ancient ways that were previously unknown entirely. Previously, Plagueis described the moment of physical death as an inexorable eventuality, and in this way subverted the natural and cosmic order, thus describing the breakthrough with midi-chlorian manipulation as a galactonic, and in this way achieving the transformative leap he had foreseen the Sith would undergo by bridging the gap between organic life and the Force, and thus so mastering death through his sciences and through his knowledge and study. Plagueis could use this same technique to prevent others from dying altogether, as said by the famous parable told to Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith. Plagueis was also able to internalize this ability to reverse his own aging, his body revitalized and rejuvenating itself as a result, leading Plagueis to predict that in time he would cease to age entirely, and in this way, achieving what he had speculated on decades earlier, inducing his midi-chlorians to create new cells, serving the needs of his body to enhance his own strength, overcome injury, and prevent existing cells from reaching sentience. And over the course of what seemingly engineered his own increase in his own midi-chlorian count, allowing him to gain and garner a higher concentration of midi-chlorians to draw upon with his immense power of the Force. As a result, Palpatine observed that Plagueis' age had been reversed by some 30 years to resemble when he had first met him, 30 years after Palpatine had come under Plagueis' tutelage at around the age of 47, just a few years before the events of the Phantom Menace, where Plagueis was just nearing the age of a century. Musing that Plagueis may have lived for another 100 years unchanged, if not lived forever, if Plagueis had not been killed by Sidious right on the cusp of discovering absolute perpetual immortality. Plagueis is also capable of inducing immortality in other beings as well, first with small creatures, and then with sentient beings, a power he planned to share with a select few of the galactic populace that they could use in various ways, which was documented in the science of creating life in the Book of the Sith, with him saying the following: "The secrets of immortality are not meant for common beings. If all knew these truths, it would destabilize the structure of civilization. I do not wish to live in a galaxy where any fool can perpetuate his ignorance for eternity." Experimenting with the extent of his own power, Plagueis attempted to thwart Palpatine's attempt to kill him by mobilizing his midi-chlorians alone, seemingly withstanding Palpatine's Force lightning, with Palpatine, even at the time of the Phantom Menace, having one of, if not the most powerful Force lightning besides some of the ancient Dark Lords such as Darth Vitiate, and various others like Marco Ragnos. Plagueis was also able to trigger a mass die-off of a target's midi-chlorians, and in this way, sever them from the Force entirely, even ripping non-Force sensitives to any form of connection they possess, something he considered to be much easier than creating life out. Using this technique, he killed King Verona, causing his midi-chlorians to vacate his body. This is similar to what Darth Nihilus did to Darth Trail, as Darth Nihilus was able to go into Plagueis' bloodstream and literally kill the midi-chlorians inside her, stripping her of the Force entirely, due to his mastery over Force strain. After triggering the die-off, there was no need for Plagueis to continue to exert himself, able to observe his victim expire at his leisure, watching it over and over again in his mind to feed on the power that gave him. By applying power of will, Plagueis, in concert with his apprentice, engineered an unprecedented and permanent imbalance in the Force, causing a cosmic shift to the dark side, which would eventually be revitalized and reinforced by the outbreak of the Clone Wars and Sidious's rise to ascendancy, with it being stated in these two following quotes in Plagueis, the Darth Plagueis novel. No Sith have ever been in this position to which we now find ourselves, Darth Sidious, in step with the re-emergence of the dark side, fortified by the signs and omens, certain that revenge and victory are near at hand. Only by making the Force service have we prevailed. 8 years ago today, we shifted the galaxy, Darth Sidious, and that shift is now irreversible. As a result, the Jedi found their ability to sense the future crippled, despite having fashioned a galaxy-spanning cosmic force bubble that protected and shielded them from the dark side's influence. They had not taken into consideration the fact that the Sith had changed. Even the venerable and all-powerful Grand Master Yoda, possibly one of the most powerful Jedi in all of history, and in the top 5 in my personal opinion, was unable to perceive the future without great strain, and even then it was shrouded in mystery, with most of what the Jedi could sense under the control of the Dark Lord of the Sith, at that time Plagueis, and would later become Sidious. Plagueis then described the lights of the Force as having been completely extinguished. Therefore, it should be assumed the bubble had, by their actions, been completely destroyed without the Jedi even knowing. In a transmutated form, Plagueis stretched out across the entire galaxy to inform every living thing of his presence, causing the Force to retreat as if in flight from him, with the very Force fearing at Plagueis' machinations and power, rebuking his efforts by instigating horrifying diseases in his test subjects. The quote goes as follows: "And so he had stretched out, indeed as if invisible, transmutated, to inform every being of his existence, and impact all of them, monoid or insectoid, secure or dispossessed, free or enslaved, a warrior waving a banner in the triumph on the battlefield, a ghost infiltrating a dream, but ultimately to no end. The Force grew silent, as if in flight from him, and many of the animals in his laboratory succumbed to horrifying diseases, showing that Plagueis' mere influence and action that he projected through the Force, even in a different mental state, was enough to cause various beings in his vicinity to die and to make the very Force itself fear." In response to the cosmic shift to the dark side, and the unnatural powers Plagueis achieved in the wake of it, the Force conceives the prophesied chosen one to oppose them, a being of pure force destined to restore the Sith and destroy the dark side, and restore balance to the Force, which is incredibly unique, as it is quite possibly implied in this that the cause of Anakin Skywalker's birth at this time was due to the machinations of Darth Plagueis. In Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, this quote is explored. Sidious recalled the desperate return trip to Coruscant, recalled using all his powers and the potions and devices contained in his medkit to minister to Anakin's hopelessly blistered body and truncated limbs. He recalled thinking, what if Anakin should die? How many years would he have to search for an apprentice even half as powerful in the Force, let alone one created by the Force to restore balance by allowing the dark side to percolate fully to surface after a millennia of being stifled? An unprecedented act that confirmed Plagueis and Sidious to be an equally unprecedented threat. Well, this comes to the end of my Darth Plagueis lore video, as well as breakdown on his power. Darth Plagueis is truly one of my favourite characters, and definitely goes in the history of the Sith as one of the most powerful beings to ever exist, period. He is, in my opinion, in the top 10, maybe just out of it in terms of mortal expanded universe Force users, in the same vein as beings such as Yoda, Mace Windu, Tulak Horde, and even the Outlander, with all of these Force users that I've just mentioned being exceptionally powerful in their own right, and Plagueis being prestigious enough and strong enough to be among them. Well, my friends, I hope you have enjoyed this breakdown, and tell me in the comments below what you would like to see more. Now, my friends, that's all from me, and I'll see you in the next video.